Judge me after you answer one question. If your husband spent years building a beautiful life around you but never made you feel like the woman at its center, would you remain grateful forever? My name is Valentina Russo. I was 38, and I worked as the creative director and public face of North Star House events. I could enter an empty room and see exactly how it should look when people began taking photographs. Of course, everyone praised the final result, while my husband spoke about budgets, fire exits, and delivery schedules. I did not invite my ex-boyfriend back into my life to hurt anyone. I only wanted Elias to remember that other men could still see what he had stopped noticing. North Star House had once been an abandoned riverside hotel. By the time I started working there, its walls had been repaired, but it still smelled of dust and damp wood. I gave the building a new identity. I chose the deep green curtains, the brass wall lights, and the long tables that made every dinner feel private even when 200 guests attended. My husband handled the invisible parts: contracts, repairs, insurance. He liked invisible things because they never asked him to express himself. One week before my birthday, I stood inside the glass conservatory checking the final layout. The wooden floor smelled of beeswax. 12 tables waited beneath the tall windows. 36 candles stood inside clear holders. 4 rose displays framed the small stage. I counted everything twice when I was uneasy. Elias entered through the service door carrying a folder and 2 cups of coffee. He placed mine beside the seating plan without asking what I wanted. He already knew. 1 spoon of sugar, a little milk, no foam. There had been a time when that kind of attention made me feel loved. After my first successful North Star gala, we had sat together on the loading dock and eaten leftover cake from paper plates. My feet hurt, his shirt was stained with coffee, and neither of us wanted to go home. Elias had placed a brass master key in my palm and told me I had made the old building feel alive. Later, I turned that key into a pendant. It rested against my dress that afternoon. My husband looked at the tables and asked whether I needed help before the staff arrived. I told him the room was almost finished and waited for him to say something about me. My hair, my dress, the birthday plans I had spent weeks arranging. Instead, he said one of the side doors needed a new lock. Of course. I asked whether he ever entered a room without searching for a problem. He said problems became expensive when people ignored them. That was Elias. Even affection sounded like risk management. Before I could answer, Naomi entered with Julian Cross behind her. I had not seen Julian in 12 years. He looked older but in a deliberate way. His suit fit perfectly. His dark hair carried a little silver near the temples. He entered the conservatory as if he had already been invited to stand at the center of it. Naomi explained that Julian was in town searching for a location for an investor presentation. She had brought him to see North Star because nobody understood its beauty better than I did. Julian looked directly at the brass key around my neck. He said I still carried the key to my husband's kingdom. I laughed and told him North Star was hardly a kingdom. It was simply a difficult building that required constant attention. Julian replied that the same description might apply to marriage. Naomi laughed. Elias did not. Julian moved closer to examine the pendant. He asked whether my husband understood how lucky he was to have a woman who could make an old property look important. I waited. Elias said the conservatory schedule still needed approval before the birthday event could proceed. That was not the answer I wanted. Julian glanced at me and said that if Elias ever stopped appreciating me, replacing him would not be difficult. It was only the first version of the joke. 3 people heard it. 4, if the venue manager near the service entrance was listening. I laughed. Elias removed his watch. He placed it face down on the nearest table and folded his sleeves once. He always did that when feelings became uncomfortable. It was his quiet way of leaving a conversation without moving. The venue manager approached him with a printed schedule. She asked whether the conservatory had his final approval. I assumed she meant maintenance access, supplier timing, or some other practical detail Elias had made unnecessarily serious. He checked the pages and signed the bottom. Julian watched him and asked whether my husband approved every decision I made. I said Elias only believed he did. My husband lifted his eyes from the schedule. He asked what had changed between us because lately, every normal question sounded like an insult when it came from him. His voice remained soft. That made it worse. I told him nothing had changed. I was simply tired of receiving permission for a life I had helped create. Elias looked at the brass key against my chest. He asked whether I still remembered why he had given it to me. I told him I remembered perfectly. It meant he trusted me. His mouth tightened for 1 second, then relaxed. He picked up his watch and left with the venue manager. Julian watched him disappear through the service door. Then he said my husband seemed more interested in owning the building than enjoying the woman who made people want to enter it. The sentence followed me for the rest of the afternoon. By evening, I had added Julian to my birthday guest list. I wanted him inside the conservatory, standing where Elias could see him. My husband had spent years believing stability made him impossible to replace. At my birthday, I planned to show him how wrong he was. Julian called the next morning and asked whether I would help him prepare photographs for his investor presentation. He said North Star House looked beautiful in magazines, but none of the published images showed the woman who had given it a personality. Of course, I understood what he meant. Buildings received attention while the people behind them slowly became part of the furniture. The photography studio stood across the river in a converted warehouse. White walls, 2 cameras, 5 clothing racks. I counted them while Naomi adjusted the collar of my black dress. She had agreed to manage the session because she said the photographs could strengthen my professional image before the reopening gala. She also said Julian had always known how to bring out the confident version of me. Julian watched from behind the photographer. Every time the camera stopped, he told me what worked. He praised the way I held my shoulders and the way I looked directly into the lens. He said most people tried to appear powerful, but I did not have to try. My husband never spoke about me that way. Elias noticed whether a table was unstable. Julian noticed whether I looked unforgettable beside it. During a break, Julian asked to see the brass pendant more closely. He lifted the key carefully and held it against the dark fabric of my dress. Naomi took a photograph before I could decide whether the moment looked too personal. Julian said the image should be the center of the campaign, a woman holding the key to her next life. I told him the key belonged to North Star House. He answered that perhaps North Star belonged more to me than anyone admitted. I did not correct him. That was my first omission. After the session, we went to a riverside restaurant where the windows faced the old hotel district. Julian ordered wine. I usually avoided drinking during the day, but the meeting had already stopped feeling ordinary. He explained that his investors wanted to see North Star's restricted rooftop suite. The suite had a private bar, a narrow balcony, and access to the original tower room. Elias rarely allowed guests there because the upper staircase needed supervision. Julian asked whether I could arrange access. I said I would handle it. There was no reason to involve my husband in every detail. North Star's public identity was my responsibility, and Julian's proposal could bring important clients to the company. When we returned to the building, I removed the brass key from my neck and placed it in Julian's hand. He closed his fingers around it and said he knew I still trusted him. I told him not to lose it. He answered that he took care of valuable things. The words stayed with me longer than they should have. That evening, Elias waited in the living room beside Ivy's folded school costume. A silver paper star had been attached to the front. I had forgotten her performance. My husband asked why I had not answered his messages. I told him the photography session had run late and the client dinner could not be moved. He said Ivy had searched the auditorium doors during every song. The picture entered my mind too clearly. Ivy standing beneath the school lights, watching for a face that never appeared. I pushed it away. I told Elias that fathers were praised when work kept them away from family events, while mothers were treated like criminals for doing the same thing once. He agreed the standard was unfair. Then he asked why Julian's photography project had mattered more than a promise to our daughter. I heard judgment, not concern. I told him the project could help North Star and that successful women did not build careers by leaving every meeting when someone at home became disappointed. Elias looked down at the paper star. For a moment he appeared smaller than the man who had once given me the master key. Not weak, just tired. I mistook the sadness for another attempt to control me. He asked where the key was. I said it was safe. That answer was technically true. The next morning, Julian joined me in the North Star office to review his presentation. He needed confirmation that one hotel group would consider supporting his private event series. Elias walked through the room while we were speaking. Julian asked whether he knew anyone at the company. My husband took out his phone and made one call. The hotel executive returned it within 3 minutes. I counted. 1 minute, 2, 3. When Elias answered, the man addressed him formally as Mr. Mercer and asked whether the trust was considering a new partnership. Julian stopped typing. The confidence left his face for half a second. Elias ended the call after arranging a meeting for the following week. He gave Julian the time and left without taking credit. Julian asked what position my husband actually held. I laughed and said Elias worked in operations and budgets. He had spent years around hotels, so of course he knew people who answered quickly when contracts were involved. Julian accepted the explanation, though he watched the door after Elias left. Naomi arrived later to review the photographs. Her favourite showed Julian adjusting the brass key against my dress. She suggested posting it with a line about unlocking a new chapter. I approved the caption. Within an hour, the image began spreading through North Star's professional network. Clients commented on how powerful I looked. One magazine editor asked whether Julian and I were launching something together. Elias did not like the post. He did not comment. He did not ask me to remove it. That silence told me exactly what I wanted to believe. My husband had seen the connection between Julian and me, and he knew he could not compete with it. The birthday was now 5 days away. Naomi offered to arrange live video coverage. Julian promised to prepare a toast no one would forget. I told him to make it honest. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to standing in a room where everyone would see me. And this time, Elias would not be able to hide behind the walls he managed. My birthday filled North Star House with the kind of people who usually made me feel important before I even entered the room. Clients stood near the glass walls of the conservatory. Employees carried champagne between the tables. Local business owners posed beneath the North Star sign, while Naomi filmed short videos for social media. 12 tables, 36 candles, 4 rose displays. I counted them again as the first guests arrived, even though nothing was wrong. Elias had spent the afternoon solving problems nobody would remember. A cooling unit had stopped working near the service corridor. One supplier had delivered the wrong glasses. Ivy had spilled juice on the silver dress my mother had bought her. My husband handled all of it without asking anyone to notice. By 7, the room looked perfect, which meant people assumed I had made every part of it happen. Of course, that was how events worked. The person under the lights received the praise. The person checking wires remained beside the wall. Julian arrived after most of the guests were seated. His dark suit fit as if it had been made that morning. He carried 2 champagne glasses and offered one to me before greeting anyone else. Naomi moved closer with her camera. Julian told me the conservatory finally looked worthy of its creative director. I thanked him and glanced toward Elias. My husband was speaking to the venue manager near the service door. He did not look over. Julian asked whether Elias had even told me I looked beautiful. I said my husband believed a working cooling system was more romantic than a compliment. Naomi laughed. Her camera remained pointed toward us, but her smile faded faster than usual. Ivy appeared beside me and asked whether Daddy would sit with us during dinner. I told her he would join when he finished working. She looked toward the service door and said he was always finishing something. The sentence bothered me, so I asked Naomi to take Ivy to the dessert table. Dinner began with speeches from two sponsors and a short welcome from Miriam Sloan. Miriam thanked the staff, the board, and Elias for protecting the reopening schedule during the renovation. I heard the word protecting and almost smiled. Even his praise sounded like maintenance. Julian sat beside me, though the printed seating plan placed him at another table. I had moved his name card before dinner. Elias noticed the change when he reached our table. He looked at Julian in his chair, then at me. My husband asked whether the seating arrangement had changed. I told him Julian needed to meet the sponsors near the stage. Elias said the sponsors were sitting at table 4. I answered that successful events required flexibility and asked him not to create tension over a chair. He did not argue. He carried his plate to an open seat beside Priya and one of the older board members. I watched him go and felt a small, sharp satisfaction. Julian leaned closer and said I had trained my husband well. Naomi heard him. This time she did not laugh. After the cake arrived, Julian stood and lifted his glass. The conversation slowed. Naomi raised her camera, and the live indicator turned red. Julian asked everyone to give him 1 minute because there were some things a woman deserved to hear in public. He described me as the most irreplaceable woman he had ever known. He said he had met talented people in several cities, but nobody could enter a forgotten building and make others believe it had always been beautiful. Guests smiled. My mother pressed one hand against her chest. Julian continued. He said losing me in college had remained one of the few mistakes he could never correct. The room changed at that sentence. Not loudly, just enough. Priya stopped drinking. Miriam placed her glass on the table. Ivy looked from Julian to her father. Then Julian faced Elias. He told my husband that he was fortunate to have me. He added that if Elias ever became tired of living beside a woman everyone else wanted, replacing him would be the easiest part. People laughed. First one table, then another. The sound moved through the conservatory because laughter is easier than deciding whether something is cruel. I laughed too. I raised my glass and told everyone Julian had always known how to keep up with me. Several guests laughed again, but the second wave was thinner. My husband did not move. He removed his watch. He placed it face down beside his plate. Then he folded his sleeves once. I knew that habit. It meant he had nothing useful to say and wanted the discomfort to end without admitting he had lost. Miriam crossed the room carrying a small approval card stamped with the silver seal of North Star Hospitality Trust. She placed it beside Elias and pointed to one line. He read it, signed the bottom, and returned the card. I assumed it concerned the bar account or extra staff hours. Of course, Elias could turn his own humiliation into paperwork. Julian finished the toast by saying some people protected buildings while others made them worth entering. Then he lifted his glass toward me. I accepted the attention because refusing it would have made the room more uncomfortable. Naomi lowered her camera before the applause ended. When I asked whether the clip looked strong, she said it looked clear. I heard that as praise. Later, Julian asked to take 3 investors to the restricted rooftop suite. Elias stood near the ballroom entrance when I removed the brass key from my neck. I placed it in Julian's hand. The metal looked smaller against his palm than it had against mine. My husband asked whether I was giving him unrestricted access. I told him Julian was not a stranger and that the investors could change North Star's future. Elias asked whether Julian knew how to protect something that belonged to another person. I said Julian knew how to take care of valuable things. The answer landed between us. Elias looked at the key, then at me. He asked whether I understood what I had just confirmed in front of everyone. I told him he was trying to turn a birthday toast into a crisis because he could not handle another man appreciating me. He said appreciation did not require making a husband into entertainment. I answered that embarrassment was not harm and that secure men survived jokes. For 1 second, his expression opened. No anger, no strategy, just pain. Then Ivy reached for his hand. She asked whether he was leaving. Elias said he would take her home because she was tired. I told him the party had barely started. Ivy chose his side without looking at me. My husband picked up his watch, took her coat, and walked toward the service exit. Guests stepped aside. Nobody stopped him. Julian placed his hand against my back and asked whether I was all right. I said I was better than all right. The live clip was already spreading. Comments called Julian fearless and described us as the couple who should have happened. Yet the energy inside the conservatory never fully returned. Priya left before the after-party. Miriam spoke quietly with the venue manager. Naomi stayed, but she stopped filming. I ignored all of it. The reopening gala was coming next, and Julian had already agreed to stand beside me for the announcement. My birthday had shown Elias that he could be replaced. The gala would show everyone who was ready to take his place. Leah arrived at our house 2 days after my birthday without calling first. She stood in the entryway holding Ivy's school backpack and the silver paper star from the performance I had missed. My husband was upstairs helping Ivy wash paint from her hands. Leah placed the star on the hallway table and asked whether I understood why Ivy had told 2 classmates that her father might be replaced. I said children repeated jokes without understanding them. Leah answered that Ivy understood enough to watch her mother laugh while a room full of adults laughed at her father. I told her the party had been emotional and that Julian's toast had been exaggerated for entertainment. Of course, Leah treated every problem involving Elias as if someone had attacked the family. She said the video had been seen by parents at Ivy's school, North Star employees, and several clients. I counted the buttons on her coat while she spoke. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I told her public attention would disappear when the next story arrived. Leah asked whether Ivy's embarrassment would disappear with it. Before I could answer, Elias came downstairs carrying a long wooden box. His sleeves were folded once, but his watch remained on his wrist. He asked Leah to take Ivy for ice cream because he wanted to speak with me alone. Leah left without saying goodbye. Elias carried the box into the home library and placed it on the desk. Inside were plans for a private creative studio at North Star House. Large windows faced the river. Shelves lined one wall. A separate entrance would allow me to meet clients without crossing active events. Every detail matched things I had mentioned over the years and forgotten 5 minutes later. He said he had planned to present it after my birthday toast. His hand remained on the rolled paper. The fingers moved once, then stopped. For several seconds, the room became too quiet. I remembered the loading dock, leftover cake, and the brass key resting in my palm. I almost saw what the studio meant. Elias had listened. He had simply listened in the language of walls and contracts instead of words. Then I looked at the drawings again and decided the timing was deliberate. My husband knew how to build evidence of love when direct affection became too difficult. I told him the studio was generous, but it did not solve the real problem. He asked what the real problem was. I offered a compromise. I would stop meeting Julian alone if Elias publicly admitted that he had overreacted at my birthday and agreed to support our creative partnership at the reopening gala. Elias looked at me for a long time. Then he removed his watch, placed it face down beside the plans, and folded his sleeves once. I read the movement as exhaustion. He said the problem was not one man, one toast, or one video. The problem was that every private disappointment had become a public test. If he stayed calm, I called him weak. If he objected, I called him controlling. If he tried to repair something quietly, I said it did not count because nobody saw it. I told him he was analyzing me again because analysis was safer than desire. He did not deny it. He admitted that he had built a life around me while often failing to stand beside me inside it. That answer was too accurate, so I made it useful. I said late. Honesty could not compete with 12 years of Julian remembering exactly who I was. Elias lowered his eyes to the studio plans. The sadness in his face was simple. No performance, no accusation. I still treated it as pressure. The doorbell rang before he replied. Miriam Sloane entered carrying a board packet. and the old silver seal of North Star Hospitality Trust. She spoke directly to Elias and said the approval signed at my birthday had been processed. I opened the packet before either of them stopped me. On the first page beneath the silver seal were the words Elias Mercer, Managing Trustee. The title held my attention for 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then I closed the packet. Boards gave formal titles to people who handled budgets and property. It did not change who Elias was at home. Miriam asked me to return the brass master key until the board reviewed Julian's private rooftop event. I refused. I said Elias had given me the key because he trusted me and could not take back every meaningful gift whenever he became jealous. Miriam did not answer me. She looked toward Elias and waited. I did not notice the order of authority because I had already chosen my explanation. By Friday, Priya stopped correcting my missed schedules. Leah ignored 2 calls. Naomi answered my messages with single sentences. Julian remained enthusiastic because his investors had liked the rooftop suite. That was enough. The reopening gala would be larger than my birthday, and this time I would control every word spoken from the stage. The week before the reopening gala became a campaign for the life I intended to claim. Julian and I built a presentation for Russo Cross Creative using photographs of North Star House, images from the rooftop suite, and client names gathered through years of events. He said I would become chief executive after the launch while he handled expansion and investors. Nothing had been signed, but of course important people often agreed on vision before paperwork. The guest list reached 212 names, 46 clients, 9 board members, 3 local reporters. I counted every group twice because a full room meant the partnership was already real. Julian spent most of his time speaking with investors, yet I explained his shorter calls as pressure. Naomi had promised to edit our final promotional video. 2 days before the gala, she said another client needed immediate help. I sent her the finished version anyway. The message showed as read. No answer came. At the press preview, staff tested the stage lights while Priya checked the seating cards without asking for my approval. Elias entered through the side doors carrying a folder. My husband looked at the new Russo Cross logo projected above the stage, then at Julian standing beside me. I told him the announcement would happen whether he supported it or not. Julian would become my creative partner and stand beside me at future events. Elias asked whether I meant business only. His voice was quiet, but several employees were close enough to hear. I could have lowered mine. I did not. Instead, I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the table beneath the stage lights. I told him Julian was replacing him in every role he had stopped fulfilling. Priya stopped moving the place cards. One technician looked down at the floor. Julian remained beside me, though he did not touch me. Elias removed his watch, placed it face down next to my ring, and folded his sleeves once. I read the movement as defeat. He offered one final choice. I could cancel the announcement, return the brass key, leave with him, and begin counseling before Ivy became part of a public fight. The offer was calm, clean, almost reasonable. That was why I hated it. I told him the one thing he could not deny. He had built rooms for me but rarely stood beside me inside them. He had funded my dreams, protected my work, and solved every crisis, yet he allowed me to accept every award alone. He treated me like a valuable project instead of a desired wife. Elias did not argue. He said I was right. The admission took the force from my accusation for 1 second, so I pushed harder. I told him being right about his failure meant I no longer had to accept the life he had designed for me. He answered that his failure did not give me ownership of everything he had trusted me with. I said trust was not ownership. Then I lifted the brass key from my neck and held it where everyone could see. I announced that Julian would replace my husband professionally and personally, whether Elias accepted it or not. Elias asked me to repeat the statement clearly. I did. My voice carried across the empty ballroom. Julian would replace him in business. Julian would replace him in my personal life. My husband picked up his watch but left the ring on the table. He said he would handle the transition properly. No argument. No warning. No request to reconsider. I heard surrender because surrender was the only explanation that allowed me to keep moving. By evening, Miriam confirmed she would attend the gala. Priya sent the final stage schedule. Several clients requested front row seating. Every reply looked like support. Julian called from the investor dinner and said the room was already talking about our launch. When I asked whether the ownership split would be equal, he said details could wait until after we proved ourselves. That answer bothered me for less than a minute. At the entrance to North Star House, I placed the brass key inside the main lock. It turned without resistance. 1 click, 2 steps, 3 doors open ahead of me. The building still answered to my hand. The audience was coming. Julian would stand beside me. Elias had stopped fighting. By the time the lights rose at the gala, everyone would see that I had already replaced him. The reopening gala began beneath hundreds of suspended lights. Julian stood beside the stage while the Russo Cross Creative logo filled the screen behind us. 200 guests faced forward. 9 board members occupied the first table. 3 reporters waited near the center aisle. I counted them because the room looked exactly like success. Elias sat beside Miriam with his watch still on his wrist. I spoke about courage, reinvention, and choosing people who recognized your value. Then I announced that Russo Cross Creative would operate from North Star House and that Julian would replace the partner who no longer shared my vision. The room remained quiet. Elias removed his watch. He placed it face down on the table and folded his sleeves once. Then he stood and smiled. For years I had treated that movement as retreat. This time, nobody else did. Elias said the venue manager had not asked him to approve maintenance before my birthday. She had asked the owner whether the conservatory could be used. The hotel executive had not returned his call because my husband handled contracts. He had called because North Star Hospitality Trust controlled 2 of the group's largest event agreements. The approval card Miriam brought after Julian's toast had not closed the bar account. It had suspended my authority to represent North Star after I publicly gave its master key to an unauthorized guest. The packet I opened in our library had not contained an impressive title for an ordinary employee. Elias Mercer was the managing trustee and controlling owner of North Star Hospitality Trust. The lights above me remained steady, but my fingers tightened around the lectern. Elias explained that he had kept his position private because he wanted my career to belong to my work rather than his family name. He had given me freedom inside North Star. I had mistaken access for ownership. The screen behind us changed. Our logo disappeared. A new slide named Priya Bennett as North Star House Creative Director. Priya stood from the first table. I said Elias was punishing me because he could not control my personal life. Miriam answered that the board had removed me for using restricted property, private client information, and company employees to build a competing business. Her voice was flat. My explanation did not reach the room. Elias then reminded me of every moment I had dismissed. The first approval, the returned call, the silver seal, the title on the board packet, the statement he had asked me to repeat before witnesses. Nothing new appeared. It had all been placed in front of me. I searched the audience for Naomi. Her seat was empty. Julian's investor leaned close to him and spoke for several seconds. Julian walked to the control desk, asked the technician to remove his name from the remaining slides, and headed toward the loading entrance without looking back. Elias placed an envelope beside the wedding ring I had left on the stage and said it contained a divorce petition and exclusive possession order, with my response date on the first page. I moved into a furnished apartment near the highway while Elias and Ivy remained in our family home. My income became irregular after North Star ended my salary and access to company accounts. Naomi stopped answering, and the friends who had laughed at Julian's toast began inviting Elias to events without me. Julian returned to Chicago and announced a different partnership 3 weeks later. Priya appeared in the trade magazine beside North Star's reopening article, standing in the place I had prepared for myself. I had believed public desire made me impossible to replace. Elias had loved me through structures I called cold, while Julian had wanted doors I never owned. I thought keeping both men aware of my value meant I controlled the choice. Instead, one man owned the room, and the other left as soon as the room stopped belonging to me. The brass key still hung around my neck, though it no longer opened North Star House. Julian said replacing my husband would be easy, but the only person removed from his life, his company, and his table was me.